Hello Internet and hello horror fans. We're back with films 3 and 4 in Universal's Frankenstein series. James Whale is gone, Colin Clive is gone, and so is Henry Frankenstein. And in his place, his two sons step up as the scientists around which the mayhem occurs in Son of Frankenstein and Ghost of Frankenstein. It's also in these movies that the final pieces really of the cinematic Frankenstein myth fall into place. The elements that when you say Frankenstein, most people on the street will think of elements. I'm thinking of things like Igor, the hunchbacked lab assistant, not present at all in Mary Shelley's novel, and only introduced in the third film, Son of Frankenstein, and recurs again in Ghost of Frankenstein. But people unfamiliar with Mary Shelley's source material will tell you about the lightning, which isn't in the book, and Igor, which isn't in the book, and all the lab equipment, which isn't in the book, and the flat head and the electrodes, which they call bolts, which isn't in the book. And because of that, when we watch Son of Frankenstein especially, but there are elements in Ghost of Frankenstein, there are elements taken from Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein, but we've managed to avoid mentioning, up until now, a film that is impossible to avoid when you, impossible not to think of when you watch Son of Frankenstein. It's the joyous, wonderful, probably the most reverential spoof ever made, Young Frankenstein. Mel Brooks and Gene Wilder, an obvious love for the source material, and they take from all four films, but they obviously put it this way: they love the Frankenstein films a lot more than the Wayans brothers ever loved the Scream franchise with their Scary Movie series of movies. And it shows, the affection and generosity towards the series shows. But when, I'm telling you, my friends, when you watch Son of Frankenstein, you will be thinking of Young Frankenstein. That's no bad thing. It's a blast of a movie. It's fun. It sees the series go in strange and bizarre new directions. By the time you get to 3 and 4, we're certainly not retreading old ground. I think they take the creature in some questionable direction. The creature almost takes a back seat and gets sidelined, perhaps to the detriment of the series. But there's madness and mayhem in these, as well as, and if you've seen Young Frankenstein, you'll know what I'm talking about, a giant pair of knockers. And you know what? I think the makers of Son of Frankenstein, I think Universal Pictures and the people behind these movies were more than aware of the effect that these movies were having on the public mind. It's not 10 minutes into the movie where Basil Rathbone as Wolf von Frankenstein, one of Henry Frankenstein's sons, bemoans the fact that if you say the name Frankenstein now, 9 out of 10 people call the creature Frankenstein rather than his father who created the creature. And it's a sly acknowledgement that even then, by 1939, people were calling the creature Frankenstein, and that name had become synonymous with the creator and the creation, and really they'll forever be entwined now, no matter how many times pedants like me call the creature and reserve the name Frankenstein rightfully for his creator. None of that matters. Frankenstein is the scientist and Frankenstein is the monster. It frustrates me, and it's really good fun to see that it frustrates one of Henry Frankenstein's sons just as much, and perhaps even the writers of this movie were trying to course correct in movie 3 and sort of nail it down right at the start of the movie and say to the audience, look, you've got to stop calling him Frankenstein. A couple of movies down the line in my next video, they even give up then with Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, where where we're talking about really the creature meets the Wolfman, but by now they've just given up all pretense of even trying, and like, all right, we'll just call him Frankenstein as well. So in Son of Frankenstein, Basil Rathbone, as I mentioned earlier, plays Wolf von Frankenstein, travelling to Germany from England to reclaim his heritage after the death of his father. And even though it's reported that Basil Rathbone felt that horror films and this film was beneath him, I do get a kick of watching his increasingly neurotic performance, moving from the sensible, rigid master of the household into this absolute nervous wreck. And it might just be Basil Rathbone cutting loose and having fun with the role, or it might just be a case of brinksmanship, because many of his scenes he's up against Lionel Atwill, who plays the Inspector Krogh with the false arm. It may just be that when you are acting opposite the kind of performance that Lionel Atwill gives, the only thing to do is throw absolute caution to the wind and just ham it up with the best of them. Whatever the reasons behind that performance, his growing, twitchy, shouting nervousness is a real blast to watch. And one of his standout lines, the almost shouted, "Do you want to play a game of darts?" By this point, he's humming with nervous energy. Lionel Atwill plays Inspector Krogh, who's, as a boy, had his arm torn off by the monster, so he has a wooden false prosthetic arm from shoulder all the way down. And if you've ever seen Young Frankenstein and Kenneth Mars playing Inspector Kemp, the analogue to Krogh from this, I had completely forgotten how far Atwill pushes this in the original. So Kenneth Mars just has to go even further in the spoof, constantly moving his arm. When in the original, you've got Krogh playing darts with Frankenstein and taking the darts and stabbing them into his false wooden arm, where the hell else can Kenneth Mars go after that? And Atwill is obviously, he's having an absolute blast in this movie. He's stealing scene after scene after scene after scene. He gets, and he's not the only heavyweight in this movie. The vast majority of his scenes are with Basil Rathbone, and they're having a wonderful job sparring off one another. The film doesn't even belong to Atwill, though. There's a heavyweight in this movie that comes through, and he owns the entire movie. And given that this was the last time that Karloff played the monster in this series of films, it ain't Boris Karloff. In this film, and slightly less in Ghost of Frankenstein, when Lon Chaney plays the creature, the creature is sidelined, is put on the back burner, is more of a brute force, a blunt instrument, bent to the will of a devious mind that he assumes to be his friend. I'm not particularly comfortable with the direction they take the creature in Son of Frankenstein. He seems to be more vicious, less caring. There's less of the human about him. And the power of Mary Shelley's original story and the movies that preceded this is that the creature shows more humanity than his creator. In this, not so much, but that's because he's under the spell of quite possibly the most devious character ever to appear in any of these classic Universal horror movies. It's Igor, played with such assured aplomb by Bela Lugosi. Igor, a character so intertwined in our minds with the story of Frankenstein, didn't even appear in the original script. Yet again, Universal Studios were lowballing Lugosi. They knew how much he wanted to play Dracula in 31. He was desperate to play the role that he played on stage, on screen. So they offered him a pittance to play it. And again, he was only being paid $500 a week because by this point he desperately needed the job. Director Roland Lee was so incensed at Universal's treatment of Lugosi that, given the script was still being written while the film was being shot, he beefed up his part and made it more central and gave him more scenes. Basically gave Lugosi more weeks of work so he could earn a decent amount of money for the job he was doing. What we're gifted with as a result is a characterization from Lugosi that it's probably better than his Dracula. Igor is a devious, manipulative, twisted, criminal mastermind who manages to turn every situation to his advantage. A man who has every disadvantage life can throw at him, including being hung and having his neck broken. The fates give him, throw him a curveball in that he's pronounced dead but doesn't die. So they can't hang him again for his crimes, but he's left with a broken neck and a hunch and revenge on his mind. And I think it's a testament to Lugosi's performance here that most people will swear till they're blue in the face that Igor has always been a part of the Frankenstein movies, because with Son of Frankenstein alone, he cements his place in the myth so assuredly that it's almost like he was always part of the landscape, to such an extent that even though Igor's character is shot and killed in this movie, without question, he is just brought back for the next film, Ghost of Frankenstein. If you want to talk about continuity snafus, the sets in this look absolutely nothing like the sets in Frankenstein or Bride of Frankenstein. They're a lot sparser, they're a lot larger, still inspired by German Expressionism. The series still has at its heart this strange fusion of 19th century British literary Gothic sensibility and 20th century German Expressionism fused to make something absolutely brand new, which is the Universal monster movie. When I see them, they look to my mind like those old big children's pop-up books you used to get, and you'd open the book and the sets pop up, and then the people are tiny in them, these huge vast cavernous rooms and the like, and it gives it, for me, a little fairy tale book feel to it. That right, we've come from England and now you're in Germany and now you're in the land of Frankenstein and the Brothers Grimm and Hansel and Gretel and on all of this. It's got the most bizarre fucking staircase you've ever seen in your entire life. Completely impractical, but built purely so that it can be lit in so many different ways that the shadow of the balustrade can be cast up on the wall in increasingly bizarre and angular shapes. If you want to think of a perfect exemplar of German Expressionism with Nosferatu, if you remember the scene towards the end of that where there's the shadow of the staircase balustrade and Count Orlok's shadow moving up it, this is kind of like that, except the shadow of the balustrade itself takes the place of the vampire. You don't even need the vampire moving up the staircase, because the staircase throws such bizarre shadows itself that it's kind of haunting itself. I'm not making any sense now. I can't leave Son of Frankenstein without mentioning Peter Frankenstein, son of Wolf, played by Donnie Dunnigan, who a year or two after this would go on to be the voice of Bambi. Donnie, God love you. The worst child actor I've ever seen in my entire life. Anyone who's seen the film will know exactly 2 words. Well, hello! You can find videos of Donnie Donegan on YouTube as an adult at conventions and the like. Thoroughly stand-up bloke with just vast amount of anecdotes about Karloff and about making those horror movies in the 30s. The list of actors that he worked with is insane. Check out Donnie Donegan on YouTube and just bask in the glory of the stories that the man has to tell. So as a man, I tip my cap to him. As a 5.5-year-old boy, oh my God, he's awful. In my mind, even though his character's called Peter, and in Young Frankenstein, Gene Wilder, he's Frederick Frankenstein. In my mind, young Peter in Son of Frankenstein grows up to be Gene Wilder's character in Young Frankenstein, and Young Frankenstein is actually part of the canon. Ghost of Frankenstein, 3 years later, 1942, is a strange beast. It opens up with quite an unexpected reversal. Wolf in the previous film has gifted the castle and its grounds to the people of the area to do with as they will, and it opens up with a town meeting where the people want to tear it down because even though the monster has been destroyed, they still feel that it's a blight on the landscape and that the curse will never go away so long as the castle and the laboratory are there. And the mayor thinks that these people are idiots until the people remind him that he's up for re-election, when he says, well, do what you want with it then. And then they go, let's blow it up! And this opening of this movie, it makes me think of The Simpsons. It's Mayor Quimby bending to the will of an idiotic townspeople who become a mob, a raging mob, at the drop of a hat. If you've seen enough Simpsons episodes, you'll know that the good people of Springfield will have pitchforks and flaming torches to hand, seemingly out of nowhere, and will instantly move en masse to burn down, kill or destroy anything that they suddenly decide that they don't like. And I'm convinced that sort of Springfield Simpsons mob mentality is inspired directly by the townsfolk of these Frankenstein movies, who pretty much at the end of all these movies are going to be blowing up castles or burning windmills, any sort of property damage you can think of. The people in the surrounding area in these movies are going to be the cause of it. They kick off this movie by blowing up the lab and blowing up the castle, which frees up the creature, and Igor manages to get him away, and they go to a different town and seek out a second son of Henry Frankenstein. He's had not one, but two strapping sons. And who knew? Because given that in Frankenstein his wedding kept getting delayed, and in Bride of Frankenstein his experiments kept delaying his honeymoon, I always had a sneaking suspicion that Henry Frankenstein really wasn't that interested in getting married, really wasn't that interested in having a honeymoon, and really wasn't that interested in having kids. But we find that he has had a second son, Ludwig Frankenstein, who Igor takes the creature to see, believing that he has the skills to fix him, to help him. The events of the previous movie have hurt him. He's not working at full capacity, and he's played by Lon Chaney, fresh off The Wolfman, because Karloff didn't return. And I like Chaney's performance. The makeup doesn't look right on him. They've put exactly the same makeup on a completely different facial and body feature. He looks kind of wrong, but he gives a very soulful performance, more soul and humanity than the script afforded Karloff in Son of Frankenstein. What I also find interesting is that Ludwig Frankenstein runs an asylum and is a psychiatrist. And we've seen before psychiatry brought into these supernatural movies in Dracula's Daughter to try and explain away things. The creature in this is treated as an insane man. No one from this town knows the myth and that he's been stitched together from dead body parts. He's not a monster to them. He's an insane man that could potentially be treated. And in the next video, when we talk about the Wolf Man, there's an element of psychology and psychiatry in that, and an attempt to approach lycanthropy from as a condition of the mind rather than a supernatural condition. Now, this sort of idea of mental disease or neuroses brings up in the ghost of the title. The ghost of Frankenstein is a bizarre moment in the film where Ludwig Frankenstein, confronted with the creature, the creation of his father that has blighted his family and his family name so much that he had to run away from it, is in front of him, and he contemplates destroying it. It was made piece by piece, and the only way to destroy it is to take it apart piece by piece. When he sees a vision of his father telling him not to destroy the creation, but giving him the idea to replace the damaged brain with a healthy brain, and that was the only mistake, that was the fatal flaw that created a monster rather than a man. And I can't, it's such a weird scene. I can't, even though the movie's called Ghost of Frankenstein, I can't see it as a ghost. I can only understand that scene as Ludwig being under such intense stress and pressure, and the whole history of his upbringing and his father's history all coming to a head, that this is actually a hallucination of his rather than a supernatural event. He's actually hallucinating it. Right, I'm going to go off the deep end here. It weirdly has echoes of Hamlet in it, where at the start of that play, Hamlet believes he sees the ghost of his dead father, who tells him to avenge his murder. And we never satisfactorily know whether it was a ghost and he was receiving a message from beyond the grave, or whether Hamlet himself is having a breakdown or is going mad. And don't get me wrong, Ghost of Frankenstein is no Hamlet, but you can't just say he was visited by the ghost of his dad. It's if you haven't seen the film, watch it, see if you can find the scene on YouTube, and tell me if you agree with me. But I think the flaw of the Frankenstein lineage, if there is one, it is in here, rather than whether they use damaged brains or good brains. I really think the character flaw in the Frankenstein men is one of ego, and is certainly one of the mind. Although Bela Lugosi had more to do in Son of Frankenstein, Igor returns, and this movie really sees his finest hour once Ludwig is either convinced by the ghost of his father or convinces himself not to destroy the creature, but to replace its damaged brain with the brain of his assistant. Igor comes up with a plan so duplicitous and brilliant that he's fast becoming my absolute favourite character of the classic Universal monsters. And up until now, that had been Creature from the Black Lagoon, for anyone who's keeping score. Igor persuades Frankenstein's mentor to lie to him and not use the brain of his dead assistant, but to put Igor's own brain inside the creature's body, taken out of his broken, twisted, broken-necked form into an indestructible body, so that this criminal, duplicitous, nasty genius can live forever inside an indestructible body. And he even pitches it in such a way to the creature that's kind of heartbreaking. The only connection these two have ever made. And I think there's a genuine affection between the two of them for one another. But when it comes to the crunch, Igor tells the creature that this way they'll be closer than ever and no one can separate them. And It's sad. It is a little sad because the creature as we have come to know him will cease to be. And I think Igor knows this and is willing to usurp the body of his friend for his own ends. And he pulls it off. And the end of the movie sees Igor inside the creature's body. Such a bizarre and unexpected turn of events that they were going to continue with and see through in Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. But that's a story for the next video, and another sad example of Universal screwing over Bela Lugosi yet again. We will get to that in the next video when we meet Larry Talbot, who becomes the Wolfman, and when Larry Talbot meets Frankenstein. So I hope you can stick around. If this is the first one you've coming across, the 3 videos previously, check out the whole series. Just go to my playlists and you'll find them under Classic Universal Monsters. But yes, next up, sorry, this line's just popped into my head and I had to say it now, it's corny, but yeah, next video, things get hairy. I'm sorry. The Wolfman and Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman.